parents made every single birthday for the last 8 years has been about my sister, and we're about to witness when I finally reach my boiling point. I'm 18 this year and fairly recently on my own from my parents. I have a sister about 10 years younger than me. She was an unplanned pregnancy and nearly did not make it to term. I don't know many details about how rough my mother's second pregnancy was since I was never told too much, but I do know it was so hard on her body that she could no longer have children after my sister was born. She was in and out of the hospital repeatedly that year. My mother almost did not survive the birth either. This made my parents latch onto my little sister, because she could have potentially never been born. Ever since then, I felt like I was just the other kid in the house except when they needed me as a free babysitter. The level of favoritism my parents showed made me believe they were genuinely sick in the head for not noticing how it was affecting me. Now it's rebounding on them, which I'll explain below, starting with my 11th birthday party. My parents wanted me to let my sister blow out my candles because she was 2 years old and cried at the sight of a birthday cake that wasn't hers. I didn't want to do it, but my parents forced me into it. They relit the candles for me to do it again after her, but the moment felt completely ruined. The same thing happened the next year, and the year after that, and so on. They just kept forcing it until it became the norm. My sister had to have presents on my birthday as well. I never got any of hers. When I asked why, they just told me that I'm a boy and boys don't need to worry about it as much. I know I was a kid, but did they really think that was a smart thing to say? Not really. My parents would always choose a place my sister would like to be at more than my own birthday. Eventually, it became more like my sister was getting 2 birthdays a year, and I got none. Beyond this, my parents made their entire lives revolve around my sister. If there was something I wanted to do, my sister had to want to do it too, otherwise it was vetoed unless I could do it alone. I learned to just lock myself in my room with video games because they did not seem to bother me there unless my sister wanted to come running in to annoy me. Hence why I put a lock on the door. My parents wanted me to remove it, but I freaked out because I was an angry teenager who was tired of being intruded on at any given time. My sister came running in more than once when I had no clothes on, and my parents were upset at me for being naked in my own room. When I pointed out how ludicrous that was, they withdrew their objection and just let me keep the lock. My sister developed quite the princess complex because of how she was being spoiled on a daily basis, and she was very demanding. So I stayed away from her as much as I feasibly could, whatever excuse I could use to not have to deal with her, even if I had to make stuff up just to have time to myself. My parents hired a teen girl babysitter and I got more personal time. Then the babysitter quit because my sister would not listen to her. My parents tried to keep me from paying by saying she did a bad job. The girl got some other people involved, and my parents finally paid her what they owed. Then they hired another girl to babysit regularly, and this one stayed. But my parents still made it clear that I was to be watching my sister any day I had free, which I went out of my way to make myself busy with my part-time job if I could. My sister treated me as her personal butler and ordered me around. She even had a stupid nickname for me that she would not stop using. Just hearing that nickname makes my blood boil. If I didn't give her everything she wanted, she'd cry and call our parents, and then I'd be in trouble for mistreating her. We had many massive arguments because of this, and after I refused to yield any more, my relationship with my parents devolved into barely any words spoken between us for some time. Yet, during my high school graduation, they had the nerve to brag to other parents that they were the reason I worked so hard. Well, they weren't wrong, but the reason they were thinking of was not the one that actually happened. I worked hard just biding my time for when I'd be free, but my parents acted like they'd done so much for me. Maybe they did before my sister was born, but afterwards it was all about her. They didn't even ask me about school until parent-teacher conferences came up. I graduated with a B and C average, and after my graduation, my parents just took me to some place where my sister would always have more fun than me, even though the trip was supposed to be for me. On my 18th birthday in July, things really boiled to the surface. Even though it was my 18th birthday, it did not feel like it was about me at all. I hoped to goodness that we were going to my favorite restaurant for once, but no. They had the party at the local knockoff Chuck E. Cheese, which is the only place like it nearby, so it was the de facto celebration destination whenever anything big was achieved, including my high school graduation. I did say it was a place my sister would enjoy more than me. I was surrounded by kids half my age having parties, and I was so bored with nothing to do except to eat mediocre pizza and play claw machines and dated arcade games for tickets to cheaply made prizes that brought me no joy. Then, when it was time for cake, my parents came out with this pink and white flower cake. Sure, it had my name on it, but it was very obviously not a boy's cake. There were only 10 candles. My parents lit the candles and set it right in front of my sister to blow out. Well, that's when it finally happened. I had this mental moment of all this pent-up hate flashing before me. I just started ugly crying. I, an 18-year-old boy, was crying in front of the whole family at the time, and everyone just froze up. I got up, and all the stuff I'd been holding in for the past 8 years just spilled out like word vomit. The entire family got to witness this event, and when it was finally over, I just walked outside to sit by the family car. Several relatives trailed out after me to say they were sorry and that they did not know about the pink cake because my parents kept it covered until it was served. I said it didn't matter, that they just didn't know. They all sat back and watched as my life was taken over by Little Miss Sunshine for the past 8 years. I had no real birthdays or celebrations of my own. They were all about her. And then, on the biggest birthday of my life, some of them started giving me apologies, but they made excuses that all this time they just thought I was okay with it because my parents said I was. I told them I was never okay with it and that my parents forced it on me every year until I just pretended to accept it. I spread my arms out and said to look where we are. Does it look like the place I want to celebrate my graduation and 18th birthday? No one even tried to stick up for me at all this time. I'm just the other kid while my sister gets everything. I didn't even get to have any of the friends there that I wanted because my parents stopped letting me invite anyone long ago after they tried to voice their opinion over my sister getting to blow out my candles. So there are 365 days in a year, except for a leap year, and was it bad to want just one of those days that's about me and not her? Instead, I'm treated like the greedy, entitled brat for wanting my own birthday. Then I just went back to ugly crying. My father came outside by this point to yell at me for making such a huge scene because my mother was crying too. My sister was upset because I ruined her moment, and now everybody in there who saw that thinks they're bad parents. I ended up yelling at him saying, "Yeah, you are a bad parent, and you should know exactly why." Well, after I said that, the rest of the family descended on him like a pack of wolves. Better late than never, I suppose, but I'd never seen anything like it before. My father was practically backed right up against the restroom front door, and then most of the crowd flooded back inside with him to have it out with my mother too. My grandparents stayed with me and apologized for having their eyes shut so tight for so long. I don't know what was said to my parents in the restaurant, but it was roughly a half hour before they came out. When they did, they looked incredibly defeated. My mother was still sniffling after crying so hard, and neither of my parents could look me in the eyes. They both awkwardly apologized for what they did and then offered to redo the party elsewhere, but that wasn't really enough for the crowd. One of my uncles made a loud sound, and my parents said they'd never make me let my sister blow out the candles again or give her presents. on my birthday or make any part of it about her. There was another amen, and my parents also apologized for getting a cake that was obviously not even meant for me, and that they just felt like I wasn't worried about cake anymore at my age. Oh boy, was that the wrong thing to say. I became furious all over again and yelled at them that my age was irrelevant. They'd literally given my birthday to my sister and had no good reason as to why, and they knew it. Then I said there was no point in redoing the party because it's too darn late. They clearly showed that I meant nothing to them. They ruined 8 years of my life until I became an adult. What future birthdays with them could I possibly look forward to now? Well, my father started to get angry at me for saying that, but when the entire family yelled at him, he shut up. My grandfather told him I was exactly right. There's no possible way they can undo the damage done now. He said my parents were awful people, played favorites, and treated me like a black sheep ever since my sister was born. What's more, they were all awful themselves because they just let it happen too, and I was owed far more than an apology. I was owed my life back. My mother broke down again and tried to come closer to me while crying my name and apologizing, but I refused to let her anywhere near me, and half the family body blocked her from getting close. I just said I could not take this anymore and started to walk away. One of my aunts chased me down and brought me back. I could hear multiple family members yelling and cussing at my parents over what happened, but I was so upset I couldn't even feel happy for any bit of justice after all this time. Also, she was still in the restaurant all by herself, and if anyone was wondering, yes, my parents served her some cake after I cried and walked out. You'd think they'd be doing what they wanted to for their primary focus in the moment, but they were called out on it later. My grandparents got me to calm down and sit in their old minivan while everyone else cleared out. My sister threw a huge tantrum after being caught opening my presents, one of which was a brand new smartphone that she threw against the wall and broke because she wasn't allowed to keep it. She just got a brand new phone on her own birthday, literally a few months prior. I ended up being so upset that I was ranting I never wanted to celebrate my birthday again. My grandparents let me stay the night at their house. When I came home, I still did not speak to my parents. My mother just kept crying because I wouldn't talk to her, and my father was as closed-mouthed as me. The following weekend, my grandparents convinced me to go out to dinner with them. When we got there, I was surprised to find a whole new party waiting for me. My parents were there, and they kept up the don't hate a smile on their faces the entire time. There was a big chocolate cake with 18 candles on it, and there was even a banner with my name. They called it my happy belated birthday graduation party because I didn't really get either this year. I did kind of have to pretend to be happy. One good party doesn't undo 8 years of favoritism or even make a dent. And where was my sister? She was sitting at the table with her arms folded and her lips curled because it wasn't all about her like it used to be. Rather than sing happy birthday for me, they just sang an altered version called Happy Day. Then, as soon as I blew out the candles, my sister screamed a painfully loud little girl scream. My parents had to rush her out and then bring her back in later, looking more upset than ever. She quietly pouted in her seat for the rest of the party. I did still get a new smartphone, and my sister got hers taken away among other things for what she did at the prior party. But the smartphone wasn't all. It was just an old white Volvo, but I loved it the moment I laid eyes on it. My grandfather knows a thing or two about cars, and he fixed it up himself. I was so happy, but my sister clearly was not. She let out another one of those screams and started having a massive tantrum, demanding a new car too. My mother had to take her into the bathroom, and they did not come back for a while. My father just went back to looking defeated while my sister had effectively ruined their attempt at trying to look good in front of the whole family. Multiple family members also had strong words for my parents, saying my sister was acting that way because they raised her to be this little princess spoiled brat. I obviously started driving the car around right away, but only days later my sister actually vandalized the car. She took a hammer and started breaking two of the side windows and cracking the windshield to the point where the car was undrivable. My parents managed to stop her before she did any more damage, but she screamed bloody murder when they grabbed her and took the hammer away, then tried to bite them. Everyone was furious with my sister, especially my grandparents, because they had put so much work into this vehicle, and my sister ruined it while having a massive tantrum. My parents had spoiled my sister so badly that she could not mentally comprehend that I could have something she couldn't. Several other family members laid into my parents about how they were setting my sister up for failure by making her an entitled brat that expects the world to be given to her, and she's going to have a terrible adult life because they won't put their foot down and teach her respect. Well, her actions did not go unpunished. My sister was grounded for the rest of the summer and, effective at the new school year, was sent to boarding school. My mother cried like a baby about it, but my father had to be adamant that it was the only way to start undoing the damage they'd done. Yes, they're fully acknowledging that they're at fault now. It was kind of hard for them not to do that since no one-sided with them at all. My sister is absolutely miserable at that school. She hates the clothes, she hates the rules, and she's been lying almost constantly. But with cameras almost everywhere now, she's not getting away with any of it. Our parents tried to visit her a few times, but she just screamed at them for putting her in that place. From what I hear, this may be her school life until she's 18 years old. Well, my parents did pay to fix my car. They had an auto glass company replace the windows and windshield, and it looks just like it did before. In August, my grandfather came to me and said if I was interested. He found me a job working for a friend. But it's 40 miles away, so I need to move out of my parents' house unless I want that commute. I was all for moving. Finding a first apartment wasn't easy, though. I had to get approved for a credit card just to get accepted for a studio. As the summer days faded into early fall, I found myself on a path I never anticipated, a path paved with independence, uncertainty, and a flicker of hope. Moving out of my parents' house was a pivotal moment in my life. It felt like stepping out of a shadow and into the sunlight, leaving behind the weight of expectations that had tethered me for so long. Finding that first apartment was a journey in itself. I remember scrolling through listings late at night, the glow of my laptop illuminating the small studio that would soon become my sanctuary. The place was modest, nestled on the second floor of a quiet building on the edge of town. The rent was just within my budget, and though it lacked the luxury of a balcony or a modern kitchen, it had a charm that made it feel like home. Once I got the keys, I spent the weekend moving in, filling the space with the remnants of my life, a second-hand couch, my gaming setup. I adorned the walls with posters of my favorite games and movies, hoping to create a sanctuary that reflected who I was away from the chaos of my family. The first night in my new apartment was surreal. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. Gone were the sounds of my sister's tantrums, the arguments between my parents, and the oppressive atmosphere that had filled our home for so long. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time. I felt like a bird that had finally escaped a cage, unsure of where to fly but exhilarated by the possibilities. I started my job at my grandfather's friend's auto shop the following week. It was a shift from the retail job I'd held in high school, but I was eager to learn. The shop was bustling with energy, the scent of oil and metal mixing in the air as mechanics worked diligently on various vehicles. My boss, an affable man named Mike, welcomed me with open arms, teaching me the ropes with patience and enthusiasm. Days were long and the work was hard, but every challenge was met with a sense of accomplishment. I found joy in solving problems, whether it was diagnosing an engine issue or learning how to change a tire. I was part of a team now, no longer just a kid trying to find my place, but someone contributing to a common goal. As I settled into my routine, I maintained a cautious distance from my family. My parents would reach out occasionally. They were still navigating the fallout of her behavior at the party, and the boarding school experience was proving to be a harsh reality check for her. I heard from my grandparents that she was struggling with the structure and discipline, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of empathy and vindication. I had once been in her position, always wanting the spotlight and resenting the attention that was lavished on me. Now, I was learning to stand firm in my own identity, no longer defined by my sister's needs or my parents' expectations. My focus was on carving out a life that was authentically mine, with a healthy balance of work and self-discovery. Weeks turned into months, and as autumn leaves began to fall, I was beginning to find my footing. My social circle expanded slowly. I met people through work and made a few friends who shared my love for gaming. We often gathered at my apartment, laughing over snacks, playing co-op games late into the night, and discussing everything from new releases to life goals. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of belonging outside the confines of my family. I even made a few trips back to visit my grandparents, who were eager to hear about my life. They had always been a source of support, their wisdom and warmth wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. I shared stories about my job, my newfound friends, and my little victories, and they listened intently, beaming with pride. Despite the distance I maintained from my parents, I couldn't completely shut them out. As the holidays approached, I received an invitation for Thanksgiving dinner at their house. Initially, I hesitated. The thought of stepping back into the old dynamics made my stomach churn. But as I contemplated the idea, I realized that I was stronger now. I had grown, and maybe it was time to face the music. When Thanksgiving Day arrived, I approached my parents' home with a mix of trepidation and resolve. The air was crisp, and the scent of roasted turkey wafted through the open door, drawing me in. As I stepped inside, I was met with a flurry of activity, my mother bustling around the kitchen, my father setting the table, and my sister, now a little more subdued, quietly helping. The atmosphere felt different this time. My parents greeted me with cautious optimism, their apologies still fresh but softened by the passage of time. I noticed the changes in my sister too. Her usual exuberance was tempered by a new humility, perhaps born from the lessons of the past month. We sat down to dinner, and as we shared our meal, there was an underlying tension, but also a sense of hope. We spoke about our lives, carefully navigating the minefield of our history. My mother told me how proud she was of my job, and my father chimed in about how he had been trying to help my sister adapt to her new school. After the meal, we lingered around the table sharing stories and laughter, tentative at first, but gradually more comfortable. The conversations that followed were different from those in the past. They felt less like a performance and more like a genuine attempt to reconnect. Later that evening, when my sister and I found ourselves alone for a moment, she hesitated before speaking. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, looking down at her plate. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I was just so used to getting what I wanted." Her admission took me by surprise. It was the first time she had acknowledged the impact of her behavior. I nodded, trying to find the right words. "It's okay," I replied, though I knew it would take time to heal the wounds. "But I hope you understand that it's not just about you anymore. I need my space too." She nodded, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "I get it, I really do. I don't want things to be that way anymore." As the evening wore on, I found myself feeling lighter. We weren't fully mended, but there was progress. We parted ways that night with a tentative truce, both knowing that this was just the beginning of a long journey toward understanding. When I returned to my apartment, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The holiday season was upon us, but this year felt different. I was no longer waiting for my life to change, I was actively shaping it. In the weeks that followed, I focused on my job and continued to nurture the friendships I had formed. My relationship with my parents remained cautious but improved. We exchanged texts and phone calls more frequently, each conversation a step toward rebuilding the trust that had been eroded over the years. Christmas came quickly, and though I was hesitant about the family gathering, I decided to attend, bolstered by the progress we had made. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, and my parents had made an effort to create a balanced celebration, making sure to include activities that catered to everyone's interests. I brought a small gift for my sister, a little something I knew she had wanted, a book series she had been eyeing. She lit up when she opened it, and we spent part of the evening discussing the characters and plot lines, a bond slowly forming amidst the remnants of past grievances. As the night drew to a close, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had come a long way from the boy who felt invisible, drowning in the shadows of his sister's spotlight. I had stepped into my own light, even if it was still flickering. In the following months, I continued to cultivate this new version of my life. I embraced my independence and found joy in the simple pleasures, the freedom to decorate my apartment as I liked, the luxury of inviting friends over whenever I wanted, and the satisfaction of earning my keep. I started planning for the future, dreaming of what it would be like to move up in my career and eventually secure a place of my own, one that was entirely mine. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own ship. My family was healing, and so was I. It was a slow process, but each step forward felt like a victory. As I looked out of my apartment window one crisp morning, the sun rising over the horizon, I realized I had finally begun to understand what it meant to reclaim my life. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to write my own story, one chapter at a time. Update: as spring blossomed, bringing warmth and color back into the world, I found myself reflecting on the journey I had taken over the past year. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and exciting, and I had carved out a space that was truly mine. Work at the auto shop continued to thrive. I was taking on more responsibilities and even starting to learn about engine repairs and diagnostics, a skill that fascinated me. Mike, my boss, had become more of a mentor than just a manager, encouraging me to pursue certifications that would advance my career. I felt proud of my progress and excited about the future. My relationship with my family had transformed too. My sister and I, while still navigating the remnants of our past, were slowly learning how to coexist without the overshadowing competition that had once defined us. We often found ourselves engaging in casual conversations, sometimes about books. I had started to see glimpses of the little girl I once adored, untainted by the princess complex that had taken hold of her. One Sunday afternoon, my parents invited me over for dinner. As I arrived, the familiar scent of my mother's cooking welcomed me, wrapping me in nostalgia. The table was set for three, with a chair for my sister, who was now more eager to help in the kitchen rather than be the center of attention. I watched as she stirred the sauce and chatted animatedly about her experiences at school. It was heartening to see her engaged, no longer solely focused on her desires. During dinner, we shared laughter and stories, and for the first time in years, the atmosphere felt genuinely relaxed. My parents made a conscious effort to include me in conversations, asking about my job and my plans for the future. I could feel the shift. They were trying to be present in my life. As the meal ended, my father stood up, clearing his throat to get our attention. "We wanted to say something," he began, looking at my mother and then at me. "We know we haven't always been the parents we should have been, and for that we are deeply sorry. We want to do better for you and for your sister." His words hung in the air, weighted with sincerity. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and acceptance. It was a step toward healing that I didn't know I needed. My mother added, "We want to rebuild our relationship. The conversation continued, the three of us sharing our hopes and dreams. I felt the bonds strengthening slowly but surely. By the end of the evening, we agreed to make family dinners a regular occurrence, a small commitment to stay connected and support each other. As the months rolled on, I realized that healing was not linear. There were good days and bad days. But the important thing was that we were trying. I saw my parents make an effort to include me in more family activities, and I began inviting them to my apartment for small gatherings with my friends. My sister also started to blossom. She was still adjusting to her new school, but seemed more open to feedback, and my parents' attention shifted toward fostering her interests rather than enforcing rigid expectations. I often found her reading the books I had given her, and sometimes I'd catch her with a new project, painting, writing, or even trying her hand at cooking. One weekend, I organized a small get-together at my place, inviting some friends and family. My sister was hesitant at first, but I encouraged her to join us. To my delight, she ended up enjoying herself, engaging with my friends, and even sharing some of her favorite games. It felt like a breakthrough, a moment where we were just siblings having fun, free from the burdens of our past. By the time summer rolled around, I had saved enough money to take a short trip. It was liberating to step away from my everyday routine and immerse myself in the sun, sand, and laughter. For those few days I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom, as if I were finally living the life I had always dreamed of. Returning home was bittersweet, but I was excited to see my family again. They had grown accustomed to my independence, and I could feel their pride in my achievements. I visited them regularly, and our gatherings became moments of joy rather than obligation. As my 19th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The previous year had been filled with challenges, but it had also opened the door to healing and growth. My relationship with my family was not perfect, but it was stronger and more honest than ever. On my birthday, I decided to do something different. Instead of dreading the day, I invited my family to celebrate with me. This time, we chose a local pizzeria that had a game room, a compromise that balanced my tastes and my sister's. When the day arrived, I felt a sense of anticipation rather than anxiety. As my family gathered around the table, there were no grand gestures or forced celebrations, just laughter, shared stories, and a sense of togetherness. My sister even surprised me with a small gift book she had been raving about, knowing I'd enjoy it. As we shared cake, a simple chocolate one this time, I couldn't help but smile at the progress we had made. The past was still there, but it no longer held power over me. We had all taken steps to understand each other, and while I knew the journey of healing would continue, I felt optimistic about the future. In that moment, surrounded by family and friends, I realized that I had reclaimed my life piece by piece. I was no longer just the other kid in the house. I was a son, a brother, and a person who had learned to embrace his own story. And as the candles flickered on my cake, I made a silent wish, not for more than I deserved, but for the continued strength to cherish the life I was building. With that, I blew out the candles, ready to welcome whatever the future had in store.